join me on stage. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Hello. Bonjour. Great to be here with you all in Paris.
Yeah, so I'm going to introduce Cynthia and Peter. Pete is English, and Cynthia, you're American. And both of them, they are spiritual teachers. And they have co-founded a very ambitious project from zero, I would say, called Awaken Life Project. And what we asked them to do is, in a sense, to because of their particular status of spiritual teachers, to go even deeper into this notion of utopia from a spiritual point of view. And then afterwards, maybe to explain what is the manifestation of it to their project. So, Pete, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, bonjour, everyone. I think I'm going to stand up. So, it's great to be here. It's a great time to be here at this conference for the evolution of consciousness here in Paris, and particularly to be speaking about this theme of utopia, which I believe is one of the most urgent, compelling, yet still very overlooked aspects of the evolution of consciousness. So I thought I'd begin today by asking you a simple yet profound philosophical question to take us into a shared exploration into what is the source of utopia. What is the source of utopia? So my question is the ultimate purpose of the evolution of consciousness, l'Evolution de la Conscience, is the ultimate purpose of the evolution of consciousness to draw our attention to that which does not evolve, to that transcendent dimension that lies beyond time? Or is the ultimate purpose of the evolution of consciousness to draw our attention to that which has not happened yet? The as yet unmanifest potential of our shared human adventure. So let's have a show of hands. So we're talking about the ultimate purpose of the evolution of consciousness. Is the ultimate purpose of the evolution of consciousness, as many great mystics and even contemporary teachers still say, is the ultimate purpose for us to discover and draw our attention to that which does not evolve, the timeless, pure, transcendent dimension of being? How many would say that's the ultimate purpose? Okay, so we have a few hands there. And how many would say that, as important as that is, the ultimate purpose is to draw our attention to that which has not happened yet? Okay, good. The vast majority. So that's very good to see. That's very inspiring. So obviously, in terms of Cynthia and I and everything we've given our lives to, we have no doubt, based on our own deep spiritual experience and also the unfolding adventure of manifesting a utopian experiment, that the ultimate purpose of consciousness, of us being here, is to create the future now. But that said, the source of utopia, the ultimate source, does call us back to the beginning, to before the beginning. So Eric shared with us just for 2 minutes at the beginning today a short meditation. And I actually found it very powerful. I thought we all went quite deep for 2 minutes. Now imagine if that's all that we did today, if we all went on a meditation retreat today, and we just let go of everything, as Eric said. Every thought, every emotion, every movement, every object that arose in consciousness, we just let it come, we let it go, we let it come, we let it go. Imagine if we did that for a weekend together, or a whole week, or a whole month, or 6 months. It's very extraordinary, it's very profound. And it is an essential part of the journey of the evolution of consciousness. Because before consciousness can evolve as us, as human beings, we do need to discover that who we fundamentally are is consciousness. Is consciousness. It's not this separate psychological self. Of course, that's a fundamental part of all of us as human beings. But if we want to awaken to who we are as consciousness, we need to find a way to experience for ourselves and realize that that's not really who we are. That's a relative dimension of who we are, but that's not the deepest dimension of who we are. And so this is why, of course, all the traditional mystical paths have really been about taking us back to the source, taking us back to the beginning. Letting go of everything, as Eric said, letting go of our attachment to this relative sense of self, so that we discover this transcendent, always already free dimension of who we really are. Always already free, here and now. But that's only one pole of the mystery, the spiritual mystery of who we are. It's been the pole that's been emphasized traditionally, and I think in previous times when things weren't changing quite so fast as they are today. If we imagine living in the time of the Buddha, for example, things weren't changing very much, very fast. And I imagine, as difficult and challenging as life is today, I think life was a lot tougher back then. So we can imagine why in these times the overriding sense of the life process and the cosmology of life was that it was just a cyclical process, a wheel of birth and death that wasn't really going anywhere. And as the Buddha said, life is suffering, it's inherently unsatisfactory, it's not really going anywhere. So the spiritual journey was all about an ascent into the transcendent dimensions of self. But the other pole of spirit, which I believe is coming to the fore in our time, and needs to come much more to the fore, is all to do with the big spiritual question of why are we here? Because the ascent, the path of ascent and transcendence, while it may answer that very fundamental spiritual question of who am I? Who am I really? Beyond this physical form, beyond my relative experience of thought, feeling and emotion. What those paths don't tend to answer so satisfactorily, can't even say the word. They don't tend to give a satisfactory answer to the question of why are we here? Why are we here? Why am I embodied? Why are we in this world? And why are we facing in the 21st century this global crisis that threatens everything that we most deeply love? Why? Why is this happening? Why are we here? So, also I want you all to ask yourself, why are you here? Well, first of all, you can ask that question in the biggest existential sense. Why are you here? In your particular body, in your particular life situation at this time. But more particularly, why are you here at this conference? Why did you feel moved to come to a conference on the theme of utopia? Is it because you're drawn towards that changeless, eternal dimension of consciousness that always already is? I don't think so. Maybe if we had a meditation retreat today, that's what we would be attracted to. Or is it because we're all here because we're all being animated by a passion, a curiosity for the possible, for new experience, new human possibilities? And isn't it also because we all care very, very deeply about where this whole human adventure is going? Am I right? Is that true? Is that why you're all here? I thought so. So I'm sure if we had time and I was to go around the room now and ask everybody to say a little bit about why they came here today, we would all discover pretty soon that while there might be many different expressions, that we're all responding to one fundamental utopian evolutionary impulse that wants to create the future now. So my point is that impulse that's coming out of no thing, that's coming out of that deep transcendent mystery of who we are, that lies beyond time. The impulse that's coming out of there, just like as far as we know the Big Bang came out of there about 14 billion years ago, that same impulse is coming out of us, arising in us, and pushing us forward and out and open right here, right now, in this moment. There's a really beautiful quote from my favourite Portuguese poet. So we're living in Portugal for 8 years now, and I feel about half Portuguese by this point. I'm a great lover of Portugal and the Portuguese. And there's this fantastic poet called Fernando Pessoa, very mystical poet. And he had a great line which said, in Portuguese, Deus quer, o homem sonha, e a obra nasce. And in English that means God wants, man dreams, and the work is born. God wants, man dreams, and the work is born. So my understanding of what he meant by God wants is this utopian evolutionary impulse that brought us all here today. That's God wanting, and that is one spiritual impulse. In that place we are one. We are totally unified. Then the next line, though, is man dreams. So I've always loved that song by John Lennon. You know the song Imagine? I'm sure you'll know it. So you remember that line? You may say I'm a dreamer. Let's hear it. But I'm not the only one. So I used to whisper that song to myself as I was growing up. As I felt very lonely and often like an awkward outsider, not really fitting into the society that I was growing up in. I'd often whisper that line, even though I hadn't found at that time, and I still didn't find for many years, many other dreamers like me. But now here I am today, look, with 300 plus fellow dreamers. And I've never spoken in front of so many people before, so you never know what's possible. But as John Lennon said, we all have a dream. And I think the beauty and the richness of this evolutionary journey that we're on together is that we all have a unique dream. We all have unique gifts and talents and eccentricities and wildness. We all have a unique character, a unique vision, a unique texture, a unique contribution to bring to this unfolding evolutionary human journey. In that sense, we are all completely unique. But in this context, if we awaken to it, we're all lit up and animated by one utopian evolutionary impulse. So this, I believe that our capacity to dream, our capacity to imagine, is very connected to what I would call the soul. That's actually issues from what I would call the soul, which is our deepest essence of who we are as an individual. So when God wants, when the one reaching evolutionary impulse that wants to become more, to give more, to create the future now, when that aligns with our unique soul essence, when we have the audacity and we dare, as Nicholas was saying, when we dare to dream, then, as Fernando Pessoa said, our work, the work, my work, your work is born. So God wants, man dreams, and the work is born. Just checking on the time. So that, as I see it, is really the source of utopia. It's when we align with that passion to create the future now. And as Nicholas was saying, we need to be the change that we want to see in the world. So being the change that we want to see in the world means that we need to change from the inside out. There is no way that we're going to meet the challenges of our global crises without a fundamental change in human consciousness. As Eric said, reminded us that Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems from the same level of consciousness. So from the deepest and most essential point of view, the global, financial, economic, ecological crises that we're facing, they're all symptoms of a crisis of consciousness. And if we are all one spirit, if we're all deeply convinced of that, then we cannot underestimate the impact that we can have on the whole. So it's our responsibility to make it happen and make the world a better place. Not as some distant kind of perfected or near perfected utopian vision far off in the future, but right here and now. We can create it here and now when we come together as one greater spiritual organism. That's what I believe the purpose of our incarnation at this time in history is calling us towards.
Okay, I always get very inspired when we get to talk about this utopian impulse. And my job today is to really talk about, so how do we do this? Because if you've noticed, human beings can be quite complex. We can look at the simplicity of what we're talking about and we can say that there's one impulse in all of us. And I think we can connect to that impulse just with the small example of why did we come here today. Because there was something that pulled us to say, let's go and find out about utopia. Let's see where I can possibly bring utopian values into the society that we have today. Everybody could have been somewhere else, but we chose to be here today. So that's very exciting to start off, just to be able to acknowledge that's in yourself, and also to see that that utopian impulse is alive in other people. So I like to call the utopian impulse the I can impulse, because it's an impulse that actually says, I want more, I want to learn more, I want more love in the world, I want more care in the world, I want more respect in the world. There's lots of things that we want, and it comes from this deep longing for something more than what we have now. Can everybody relate to that in their experience? Okay. Now there's a part of us that also says, I can't. It's the part of us that comes in and says, it's not possible for me. The world's a mess. It's not possible for something to change. I can't do that. I'm just small and insignificant. Can anyone relate to that? Yes, let's be honest. So there's both these movements in ourselves, and what we try to do at the Awaken Life Project is we want to make conscious both of these movements. Because this utopian impulse is active in us all the time. It's always there. It's always saying, reach for something higher, I want to learn more. It's a curiosity that we have. It's brought us to this place where we have the technology that we have. We want to innovate, we want to create. But a lot of the time, when that impulse is active in ourselves, we're not even aware that it's happening. And it doesn't have to be for the big things, it can be for the small things. It can be in your relationships. It can be just in the mere fact that you want to be more together with your partner. The other side of the coin is the I can't voice. And the I can't voice is always there too. But what we get to do is we get to decide which voice that we listen to. But we have to become conscious of how the I can voice is manifesting in us, and we also have to become conscious of the I can't voice and how that manifests in us. Now, as Pete just said, this impulse, this I can impulse, it's a universal impulse. The I can't movement in us is also a universal movement. And we call it ego. So our definition of ego that we use is the part of ourselves that insists upon limitation and insists upon separation. So if you go to that deeper part of yourself, and you may do it in meditation, you may do it in your everyday life, in nature, when you connect to that deepest part of yourself, there's a part of you that's already free. There's a place where you can look at all the complexity of being a human being from somewhat outside of it. So at the Awaken Life Project, we come together and we want to be able to support both of it. We want to be able to support this highest impulse, this impulse that's arising that says create something more. We want to support that in the human being. We also want to come together so we can consciously understand this movement of ego in us, because it's the counterforce of the I can impulse. And you might look and you might say that it's in opposition. Ego is in opposition to evolution, but it actually isn't. Because ego will cause suffering. And if you've noticed, have you ever noticed that usually as human beings, we don't really change until we suffer? Have you noticed that? It's kind of an evolutionary driver if you think about that. So the smarter we get and the more consciousness we have, hopefully we learn that we can suffer for a shorter period of time if we move from choosing the I can't impulse, or the I can't movement, and we choose to go with the I can impulse. So the quicker we do that and the more we shift our identification from being separate, isolated, and alone, and we shift to this impulse, and becoming part of the evolutionary process itself, then all of a sudden we see our life in a much bigger context. We actually see that we can make a choice to be more, to create more. We can line up with this impulse that's already courageous. There's already energy there. There's resiliency there. Because as human beings, we know when we try to make changes, especially with other human beings, not just ourselves, it can be a rocky road sometime. Have you ever noticed that? Okay. I mean, quite a rocky road sometimes. But the most important thing is that we don't divide. Which means we don't go from reaching for something higher, it gets a little rocky, and we go, ooh, it's a little rocky, I'm going to go back over here in my isolated, separated position where I feel safe and secure. So do we have enough courage to actually stay in this impulse, reaching for something higher, not knowing, being more interested in what we don't already know, finding out, being willing to have friction between us? Can we stay in that intensity as a human being and not divide? And I'm telling you, at the Awaken Life Project, we're doing this with people, and we go through rocky times. It's very, very challenging. Just as a couple, we go through rocky times. It's very, very challenging. But the point is we don't divide. And sometimes you just have to look at each other and you have to just go, we're on the same team. I don't like you. I want to just, I want to be right. But I'm not going to divide because I know we're on the same team. And what team are we on? We're on that team of humanity trying to reach for something higher. So it's very important that we actually connect to this utopian impulse in ourselves. But it's also very important that we get to know this movement of ego in ourselves. So we very much work with being part of an evolutionary process. So we're both. We're already, the deepest part of ourself is already free, and we're developing human beings, and we're a work in progress. So if you can hold the whole picture in yourself, you're going to have the courage to be able to make the changes that you want to make. So, what we actually, I was going to tell you a little bit about the history of the Awakened Life Project, and I'm going to do it very quickly, because I'm running out of time. But I'm telling you this story because it shows that it's just like everyday people can actually do extraordinary things and have an effect on people. And it's our story, but it could be anybody's story. So 10 years ago we got together, and the impulse, this utopian impulse, actually brought us together. And it said, you're coming together to create something together. We didn't know exactly what we were going to create, but we knew we were going to create something. So the first year we were together, we made a point to look at all of these movements of ego within ourselves. We made a point to actually meditate and get more connected to this deeper part of ourselves. And we learned a lot. And we knew that whatever we wanted to create, that our relationship was the foundation. So if we couldn't walk our talk between the two of us, how could we talk to anybody else? And sometimes, I tell you, being part of this project, sometimes the only thing that keeps me going is because I care about what I'm doing. And it's the same thing. Sometimes the only thing that keeps us together is because we care about what we're doing. So it's tough sometimes. So 8 years ago we decided to come to Portugal. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of practical skills. We were drawn to create something for other people. We found some land. Basically it was it was this. Okay, it looked like this. It was basically a bunch of buildings that had no roofs, and some had no walls. But we looked at this, and we knew that this was the place, because the impulse said, this is it. And we're like, oh, it's bigger than what we expected. But we said, nope, this is it. We're like, really? And we're like, yes, okay, so we have to do this. So we didn't have the practical skills. We had no idea how to renovate buildings. We had no real gardening experience. Pete was a gardener once in London years and years ago, and I basically didn't even know what dirt was. So we didn't have a lot of experience. But we started to create. And the people that we needed showed up. The money that we needed showed up. We came here with almost nothing. And fast forward 8 years later, we have this. And more importantly, what we have is we have a network of evolutionaries. We have a network of people who are committed and giving their lives to living this utopian impulse, not on their own, but together. We have projects that are based on the same values that we have in following this utopian impulse. They have to follow their own passion. So there's projects creating that are separate. We're at Quinta de Miserella. At Quinta de Miserella, we're the spiritual hub of the Awakened Life Project. But we have another project that's separate from us, where the people in that project are interested in health. So their focus is on that. Another project that basically is about family and education. Their focus is on that. Another project that is stemmed from us that is about reforestation. So everyone gets to follow their own passion, but we come together in the one value of actually manifesting this utopian impulse. Here and now together. So I think I'm probably running out of time.
Yeah.
So that was the short version.
Thank you, that was really, really inspiring. when you talk about the utopian impulse, you know, and I mean, it's always good, I think, also to see how much it's alive in us, because you know that the biological level. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's the impulse to procreate. You know, sometimes it's so much active in us that we want, you know, beyond us, beyond our own will. You know, there is a need to procreate in women, or when we want suddenly, you know, to follow our creative impulse. You know, to immerse something new in art in whatever area, and that's something sometimes we can, you know, even forget to have lunch or to eat in order to go through that creation. And it seems that at the spiritual level, this impulse is about evolution of consciousness. I want to become more conscious. I want to, as you say, I want to bring more care, more love, more consciousness, more perspective, more possibilities in the new world, the new culture, to following that impulse. So it seems it's very impersonal, because you say was common to every human being, coming from the source of utopia itself, and it seems it's very alive in all of us. But my question is, as you said very rightly, it seems that there's also a part of us, we call it ego, that is resisting to that. So there is a kind of division in ourselves, or the double motivation, I would say, having two different directions. One is the motivation and the goal of the ego, one maybe just to stay by itself, by himself, herself, and you know, divided from the rest of it. And what's happening in Africa, what's happening, you know, I don't have a connection with the suffering which is happening there. And this utopian, you know, impulse to become more aware and to create a world of better harmony and unity. So how is it possible to go from one to the other? You said it's about suffering, you said it's about transcendence also. Is meditation the solution? Or what is your proposal?
Can we both do this? If you go first.
Okay. So I'll give you mine. Well, first of all, I think it's very important, as Cynthia said, and I think if we're all willing to just be very real, we can all recognize that we have an ego, that what we're calling ego is part of our human nature. And I don't think, actually, at least in my experience, transcendence is enough. Maybe in some very rare cases, people take that journey back to the source through meditation or through spontaneous awakening. And maybe as a result, in a very rare case, their entire relationship to the human experience is transformed. And their ego basically is no longer in the driver's seat of the human vehicle. But that's definitely the exception, and that is not usually the case. So one of the things I've given my life to at the project, and is a foundation of that project, is meditation. Is a practice that grounds ourselves in that already free dimension, where we recognise that who we really are is not the passing content of consciousness, but that which perceives and transcends and includes all content. So that's absolutely primary and fundamental. But at the same time, in the practical reality of living a human life, and especially in our relationships, as we all know, that's really not enough. We actually have to be willing to inquire and explore and find out for ourselves what motivations, what patterns, what habits we have are basically coming from what we call the ego, which means a movement of self-contraction in the human organism. Or are those impulses, those movements, those preferences coming from a deeper place that have to do with, as I was saying, our unique dream as an awakening soul, and our passion to become a more fully human being. So, in our experience, it's really a movement of both letting go and meditation, and giving ourselves to that depth consistently with deep commitment. But it's also a movement of ongoing inquiry and willingness to confront and face into the very real challenges that arise in human life. But the most important thing in terms of that is a deep understanding, as Cynthia said, that it's all part of the process. So often the way that ego is related to in spiritual paths is it's something that's basically in the way and it needs to be got rid of. And then we'll be a beautifully enlightened human being. But actually, the ego is not in the way, it is the way. It is the way. It's actually engaging with all of those structures and movements that keep us limited, that keep us separate, that keep us bound, facing into them and endeavouring to transcend them. That we actually truly change. That's the only way we truly transform as a walking, talking human being. I believe that still today there's far too much emphasis on this transcendent ascent in spirituality. And what the soul of the earth is screaming for, and I believe God is screaming for, if he could come here and scream, is, hey, wake up everybody, it's not about transcendence, it's about discovering that you are me, that we are God, but from there, that's a launch pad, that's not an end point, that's a launch pad to get involved here, to get engaged here and live a truly awakened human life. As one of my great spiritual heroes, Sri Aurobindo, said, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the Aurobidians, he said, we human beings, as we experience ourselves to be at this time, are a transitional species. We are a transitional species. So just to open up to that possibility, it's like, whoa, wow, we're not finished yet. What comes next? Aren't you all interested in that?
He loves to talk. I always have to say, I want to talk too. I just want to say something about this movement of ego that Eric was talking about, because it is something that we want to transcend, and what Pete was saying is it does help us to evolve. So when we, as human beings, we come together and we talk about this impersonal movement of ego in ourselves, usually we personalize this movement, and usually we're ashamed of the movement of ego. So we're ashamed of being competitive, we're ashamed of our narcissistic thoughts. We're ashamed of a lot of our human experience. But when you come together with other individuals and you start looking at the one movement of ego, and you realize that it's not your personal problem, it's your personal responsibility not to manifest it, but it's not your personal problem, something starts to happen within the individuals. And there's a level of ease of being that comes into the room. There's more trust, there's more transparency. So you can be talking about very deep structures of competition or anger or whatever it happens to be in an evolutionary context. You can speak about that with other people. And you can even talk about pride. We had a women's group last weekend where we were talking about pride and competition between women and a deep mistrust between women. So very real and raw subjects. And it was very real, raw, and implicating. And sometimes pride did come into the room, but we didn't divide. But at the end of the day, even talking about those kind of subjects, what we end up with is a higher level of consciousness. We ended up with a higher level of integration. We ended up with more love, more care, more respect. So ego can also be a driver to take the human being to more care, more love, more respect, to something higher when we're able to come together and speak about the impersonal movement and not just sit alone by ourselves and think we have a special problem that we have to get over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. Thanks, Claude.